dear Fame-ily, back in my 20s, I wrote about 26 Fame stories, and I only ever shared them, well, with Sue Hines, because she was a pen pal of mine at the time, and then other friends, but not that many, just a few. It's not really seen the light of day, apart from a few people I used to be pen pals with, and we used to communicate with cassettes. Yes. Didn't have computers then. It was after I'd seen the kids in concert, and then I just started writing these fan fiction stories. I shared a couple on the new online Fame magazine that Mark put together. And I really appreciate the fact that he let me share two of my old stories. And I got a fair bit of feedback for that. So I thought I would read one. This one was written while Fame, well, I wrote them while Fame was still on television. Because this one has not got Holly in, or Chris. I reread it to myself last night. Thinking, am I going to be brave enough to do this? Right, okay. I thought I'd make audiobooks, as you know, it's easier for me. It's basically written out, so yeah, good luck, Penny, with reading your own writing. Yeah, this is written in ink on paper. This is the first time I've ever done an actual audiobook. Now, this type of stories I wrote are not exactly the series. Yeah, I basically took the Kids from Fame characters and did my own sort of style of story. I covered many genres. I did thriller. This one's a thriller, sort of, I suppose. Yeah. And I did science fiction. And I wrote a horror story. That's quite dark. I can see why I went on to loving the X-Files later in years. Yeah, the horror one with the Kids from Fame is not for the faint-hearted. It's not exactly a nice little Fame story. No, so I don't think I'll start you on that one. Yes, this is set in the School of the Arts with the kids. Holly's not in it. Chris isn't in it, because obviously I wrote this before they came into the show. I'd say it was set between season 1 and season 2, but Julie's left earlier in my story. She's not in it. But anyway, I did centre a lot on Bruno, because he was my favourite character, and Doris. And I did also like putting Bruno and Doris close together. In fact, I did write a couple of love scenes with Bruno and Doris as well, a couple of love stories, and nothing too strong, I promise. It's nothing like that. No, well, there's you'll find out, because there's actually some Bruno Doris interaction in this story as well. So okay, right, I'm going for it. Okay, so I really hope you like this. Oh boy. Okay, I'd love feedback from you guys, because if I don't get enough feedback from it, I won't make any more. But I'm just going to test the waters, and here we go. Okay. Fame. An unfair accusation. Chapter 1, Just Another Day. The School of the Arts was almost empty and devoid of human beings when Bruno alighted the steps. He checked his watch. It was only 7:30 a.m, which would explain why there was hardly anyone around. School lessons did not begin until 9 o'clock, but it wasn't unusual for several kids to turn up early because some liked to rehearse in the dance halls, trying to perfect a routine in ballet or jazz, which later would be performed before their classmates and teachers, and so on. Bruno rarely arrived at such an early time because, like many kids, he preferred to lie in bed dozing till the alarm went off at a fairly reasonable hour. Sometimes he'd miss the alarm and sleep right through it, till his father would enter his room and draw back the curtains, allowing a sudden glare of sunlight to fall directly on his son's face. This either caused Bruno to yelp in pain and bury himself under the bedclothes, where he'd remain there trying to fall back to sleep, or he'd wake up suddenly with a start. If all else failed, Mr. Martelli used a method which usually was guaranteed a success. That was to pull off all his son's bedclothes, following on by a shove, only not too hard. One time he'd used this method and Bruno had been half on his side, right on the edge of the bed. The sudden movement of the bedclothes had caused him to turn over and naturally fall straight out of bed onto the floor. That had definitely woken him up. But today he'd not needed his father's help because he'd wanted to get to the school early to work on an assignment for Shorofsky. He'd been set this task along with his classmates at the beginning of the week, and it was due in today being a Wednesday. It wasn't like Bruno to be behind in his work, but this particular assignment had stumped him, yet he was determined to finish it before the lesson began. So, with sheet music under one arm with the Martelli scrawl all over it, and a shoulder bag containing the textbooks he'd need today, slung over the other arm, he began to make his way to one of the music cubicles at the far end of the corridor on the second floor. He was halfway up the steps leading to the correct floor when he heard someone enter the lobby and turned to see his English teacher, dressed in a jogging suit, looking very red in the cheeks, her hair tied up in a bun with straggly locks over her face, which had fallen out of the bun. Miss Sherwood looked up to see his large blue-green eyes staring at her, a slight curved smile on his face. She was quite taken by surprise. "Well, Mr. Martelli, what are you doing here so early?" She didn't wait for an answer and continued with, "You know, no one is supposed to see me looking like this first thing in the morning." She smiled up at him, and he returned the smile before answering her question. "I'm working on something for Mr. Shorofsky." Miss Sherwood stared at him. "At this hour?" "Well, I need to get it finished," Bruno replied innocently. "Don't tell me. It's due in today?" Bruno nodded in reply. "Well, don't let me keep you. You'd better get on with it," Miss Sherwood explained, wiping a lock of hair from over her eyes. "Oh, it's not that I've not been doing my homework. It's just that I'm kind of stuck with it." "Oh, I see. Well, I'm sure Mr. Shorofsky will help you out." Miss Sherwood smiled and began to continue down the corridor, till she stopped for a brief moment to ask him an all-important question. "Martelli?" "Yes?" "You have done the English essay I set?" Bruno grinned and replied, "Yes, Miss Sherwood. Would you like me to prove it now or during your lesson?" "During the lesson, please, Mr. Martelli," she retorted, then continued towards her English room, satisfied that one of her pupils at least had done the work. For a few seconds Bruno watched her departing figure, then remembering he'd got a great deal of work in front of him and very little time to do it in, he hastened towards a music cubicle with the intent of staying there till he'd completed Shorofsky's assignment. The problem with the School of the Arts was everyone was too friendly and had a habit of never allowing one person to be alone, so it wasn't long before someone entered his cubicle and made a beeline straight for him. Bruno hadn't had much luck on his synthesizer and was just beginning to feel he was at a lost cause when the door flew open, making him jump out of his skin. Slowly he looked up and saw it was the young, overly excited as ever Puerto Rican girl, and by the look on her face something told him he was going to get roped into one of her wonderful ideas. "Hi, Martelli," she greeted, bounding over to the synth, clad in dance tights, leg warmers and a long multicoloured T-shirt belted at the waist, her usual state of dress. Bruno's smile had that definite hint of perplexity whenever Coco made a graceful entrance such as this one. "Hi, Coco," he replied cautiously. "What brings you here so early?" "Actually, I was going to ask the same thing of you. I'm quite used to early morning workouts, but I rarely see you here." "It's an assignment I have to complete for Shorofsky," Bruno answered, indicating several sheets of music he'd already written, which was mainly blacked out with thick pencil lines. Seems like it's not working out then, Coco said, noticing the amount of crossing out he'd done. You guessed right, Bruno replied, whereupon he began to play the notes, which hadn't got a line through them. It was only in skeleton form, but Coco could feel there was a definite tune there somewhere. Well, he asked when he'd finished playing. Coco pondered for a while, then answered, It needs work, but it's coming. I wish you'd hurry up and arrive, Bruno sulked. Why don't you see Mr. Shorofsky about it? He'll probably be able to give you a helping hand, Coco suggested. Oh, I'm going to. He began to play again, then stopped, crossed out a few more written notes, added several more, then glanced up at his friend. Is there something you wanted? He asked her, hoping it wasn't what he thought it was. Well, I kind of need your help, she replied, still with that eager look in her eyes. Bruno smiled, knowing he was about to be defeated and once again would give in to her demands, simply because he was just an old softy. It's not an audition by any chance? He asked. No, Coco replied, not this time. A sudden wave of relief flooded over him. No, he said, surprised. No, Coco said again and flashed him a cheerful grin. Then what do you want me for? Bruno asked, puzzled. Usually that's all she required him for as a personal accompanist. Bruno, I'm taking music classes as of today. Remember me telling you at the beginning of term that I'm planning to achieve success in all the performing fields? Well, music's one of them, and I start today. Bruno looked a little startled. What instrument are you planning to master? He asked. Yours, she replied brightly. Mine? The piano, Martelli. I can play it a tiny bit already. I've mastered the scales, I think. So you need me as what? A teacher, my teacher. How about it? Coco replied, patting him on his shoulder. Wait a moment, Bruno said. Shorofsky will teach you. I know that, but I want someone after school hours to help me. She noticed a frown on his face and added, Unless, of course, you're too busy. Bruno sighed. Well, I am at present, but I'll give you a hand now and then if you like. He grinned cheekily and added, and show you how to depress the key. In answer, Coco playfully hit him on the top of his head. Thanks, Martelli. Now I'll leave you to finish your dynamic masterpiece. Ciao. Bye, he replied, and watched her leave the room. She always reminded him of a young gazelle, as indeed Coco was very graceful in her movements, and she had a tendency to bound in and out of classrooms and down the corridors of the school. When she'd gone, he returned to his never-ending score. At 9 o'clock, the bell sounded out loud and clear, right on time, as usual. Bruno closed his eyes briefly, uttered a small noise of annoyance, and threw his hands down in despair. Nothing at all had surfaced yet, and he'd been working on it for at least 1.5 hours. In the distance, he heard the pattering of footsteps, occasional yells, and general chatter. Then about 20 kids piled into the music cubicles, ready for their individual rehearsals. 4 of them, 2 men and 2 women, entered the one Bruno was occupying, carrying violins. One of the men explained that the room had been assigned to them, so Bruno was turfed out almost immediately. Gathering his unfinished sheet music under one arm, he made his way to his homeroom, which was Miss Sherwood's English classroom, and sat himself down at his favourite spot, the back. Just as he'd sat down, the kids piled into the room like a herd of hippopotamuses, yelling and giggling and generally making a usual nuisance of themselves. Amongst the group were Danny, Leroy and Doris. They and Coco, along with Bruno, were the remaining little gang, since Julie had gone and got married and Montgomery had moved out of New York at the end of the previous term. Doris spotted Bruno almost straight away and headed towards him. Martelli, good morning, she greeted cheerfully. And how are we on this grey, drizzly morning? Bruno's eyes seemed to light up when he saw her, and a large smile spread across his face. He'd been angry over his failing assignment only a few moments ago, but it didn't seem to matter for now. It was always the same with Doris around. She always managed to blow away the cobwebs which sometimes hung over him. She was like a little ray of sunshine in his life. Hello, Schwartz, he replied as she sat down on the chair next to him. Would you believe I was here for 7:30? You? She exclaimed in total surprise. Here at 7:30 a.m.? Martelli, whatever got you up that early? I know you, and your usual time of arrival is just 2 seconds before 9, when you make your own way to school, that is. Doris noticed the music sheets. Ah, she said. Catching up on the old homework, I see. No, more like giving up on the old homework, I see, Bruno corrected her and shrugged. You never give up, Martelli. It's okay, I'm seeing Mr. Shorofsky about it anyway, he said quickly, noticing Miss Sherwood coming into the room. All of the kids knew that she did not approve of idle chatter during registration, so Bruno indicated to Doris to stay silent. Good morning, everyone. A small group of kids were still chattering away like chipmunks. Miss Sherwood flashed them a warning stare and repeated her words a little harsher. Good morning. Danny started winking at several of his friends, including Coco and Leroy, and in unison they all replied, Good morning, Miss Sherwood, just as they would have done in junior school. And while they were speaking extremely politely, they sat up straight and folded their arms. All right, that's enough, Miss Sherwood said, and sat down at her desk. The registration only took just under 2 minutes, and for once everyone was present. She'd almost completed marking the registrar when there was a knock at the door. Come in, she called. It opened and a freshman student entered and timidly handed her a note of paper, then left quietly, closing the door behind her. Miss Sherwood read the note, then addressed her class. This is for all you music students who will be attending the lesson in the second period. Bruno, who'd been dozing off at the back of the classroom, nothing new to Doris, looked up when he heard his teacher speak. Martelli, Doris whispered, 7:30's too early for you. In future, make it 9, she added, noticing him stifle a yawn. He nodded briefly, then turned his attention back towards Miss Sherwood. It was then that he noticed her expression, which seemed to be a mixture of concern and worry. There will be a temporary replacement for your music tutor this week. You are to address her as Miss Davenport, Miss Sherwood explained. Why, what's happened to Shorofsky? A kid asked in front of Bruno. Mr. Shorofsky's fallen ill and is on sick leave. Fallen ill? Doris said, also with a look of concern on her face. Miss Sherwood, what do you mean by fallen ill? He's in hospital, she replied, her voice faltering. Bruno by now was terribly concerned. What's wrong with him? He asked nervously. It was no use beating around the bush with her kids. They were far too intelligent for long-winded explanations, which covered up the complete truth of the matter. Okay, listen, she commanded lightly, her voice still displaying emotion. Mr. Shorofsky suffered a heart attack last night, and he's been taken to Bellevue. Oh, my God, Coco said under her breath, eyes wide and beginning to fill with tears. The rest of the kids showed great concern, and Bruno sat staring into space, unable to believe the words that had just been said. Slowly he raised his arm. Miss Sherwood noticed and nodded briefly. Is he going to be all right? Bruno asked very quietly, feeling like part of him had suddenly left him. Mr. Shorofsky and he were the closest than they'd ever been, even if they still argued over music styles now and then. But if anything happened to his old music teacher, Bruno just couldn't bear to think about the consequences right at that moment. Miss Sherwood answered his question. The hospital have no idea how serious it is at the moment. Hospitals have no idea about anything, Leroy snorted. Well, you'll let us know, won't you? Doris asked. Of course I will, as soon as I find out what's happening, Miss Sherwood replied. All conversation ceased when the bell went for first period, and Bruno and Doris were the last two to leave the room. She noticed her friend's look of apprehension and hugged him briefly. Bruno, he'll be okay, she said, trying to soothe his worries, whilst at the same time seeking to reassure herself that what she'd just said would ring true. Mr. Shorofsky isn't going to let a heart attack stop him. It's the first time he's ever had one, Bruno replied ruefully. Both kids knew the old music teacher was getting on in years, and for the first time in their life, deep down, they began to seriously consider the possibility that perhaps the old man was finally reaching his last stages in life. Please don't die. Not yet, Bruno said to no one in particular, and Doris once again embraced him. Then they both headed for their first lesson, which was biology, which meant looking at dead rats for an hour. All through the double period, both Doris and especially Bruno couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Shorofsky, and the thought of this new teacher he was going to have lessons with appalled Bruno. What was she going to be like? Sympathetic or a downright dragon? And just how did she react to kids not handing assignments in on time? Bruno knew that Mr. Shorofsky would understand his reasons and would do all he could to assist him in completing projects he had difficulty with. But what of this new person? Would she help him, or just believe him to be incompetent and mark his work with a nice large F. One thing Bruno knew for certain, he wasn't lazy or incompetent. He'd be all right in her class, he hoped. The third period arrived, and as kids rushed around and finally settled down to work in various classrooms, Bruno, who'd been sharing a chocolate milk with Doris during break, said a brief farewell to her and resentfully made his way to music studies, which was going to last another whole hour. Never before had he not wanted to attend this lesson, because he'd previously taken it, and others, with Mr. Shorofsky, of whom Bruno had always felt comfortable with. Now, he wasn't at all sure how things were going to turn out, but at this particular moment in time he decided another hour of studying dead rats would suit him rather than face third and fourth period, and Bruno had always hated biology. When he arrived at his destination, he immediately spotted Coco and went over to join her. Seating himself next to her, he briefly gave her a rather nervous smile and proceeded to get the books he'd need out of his bag. Coco noticed the look of worry, it wasn't difficult to spot it, and said, "You didn't get the assignment finished then?" in a very sympathetic and understanding tone. Bruno looked up, wondering whether Miss Davenport was going to show signs of sympathy, and deeper down inside himself he was praying that she would. "You got it," he replied sullenly, to which Coco reached over and patted his hand. "Don't worry about it, Martelli," she soothed. He gave her a compendious smile, which presently died when he noticed the temporary tutor enter the room. Her first words were in a high-pitched, shrill-like voice, which approximately confirmed Bruno's fears. "Could I have everyone's attention, please?" The strange and rather strict tone, unlike Miss Sherwood's, or indeed any other member of staff in the school, suddenly caused a hushed silence to fall over the students. "My name is Miss Davenport, and I'm here to take over from Mr. Shorofsky while he's away." She certainly looked the part of a teacher, only more like the ones you were taught by in private schools. She was dressed in an immaculately clean pleated skirt in a light beige colour, with a cream blouse and jacket to match the skirt. Her mousy hair was neatly placed in a tight bun, and on her nose were gold-rimmed spectacles. She was at least in her late 40s, and when she looked at the kids they noticed her eyes behind the glasses were a piercing bright green. "I would like to begin by collecting all your homework assignments in." Kids began to rustle sheets of paper as one by one they handed their work in, passing it down from person to person until it finally reached the front of the room, where Miss Davenport stood waiting to collect it. Again Coco glanced over at Bruno while she handed in her work. Even though she hadn't actually begun a music lesson until now, she'd undergone a few private tuitions, and Shorofsky had set her the same assignment as everyone else. She noticed that Bruno hadn't yet handed in his unfinished work, but instead had raised his hand. Miss Davenport perceived this through her rimmed spectacles. "Yes?" That simple word shot through Bruno like a sharp steel blade being plunged into the heart, causing him to stammer on his question. "Please, miss," he began, with deciding he'd better be extremely polite. I can't hand in my assignment just yet because—" She cut him off curtly. "And why not?" Because it's not finished, and—" "Not finished!" she exclaimed in total surprise. Obviously her previous pupils had been goody-goody two-shoes, always handing stuff in on time, knowing exactly how to accomplish tasks without fail. "And why, may I ask, isn't it finished?" "It's not completed because I'm stuck on it and I need assistance," Bruno answered weakly. The look she gave him made him go cold. "I expect everyone to hand in work fully completed when I require it," she told the whole class, then pounced on Bruno again. "What's your name?" she asked sternly. "Bruno Martelli," he replied timidly, aware of the rest of the class's gazes aimed directly at him. "Well, Mr. Martelli," she pronounced his name like it was some kind of virus, "I want to see you at the end of the lesson." Bruno let out a small nervous sigh, then decided he had to try and stand up for himself. "Mr. Shorofsky's come across my problems before, and he's always offered to assist me, and—" Again she cut him off mid-sentence. "I'm not Mr. Shorofsky," she stated firmly. That was plainly obvious to Bruno. His old music teacher had never acted like this with him. She spoke again, directly at him, of course. "And I do not like repeating myself. Young man, I'll see you at the end of the lesson," she announced severely. Bruno weakly decided it was going to be useless to try to talk to her, so didn't utter another word. Instead he looked down at his hands and then across at Coco, who noticed the plea for help in his eyes and tried to give him a reassuring smile, but Bruno wasn't in the least bit comforted by it. Also, he realised his relationship with Miss Davenport was going to be virtually unbearable from now on. The lesson ended and pupils left the room, glad to be free of this new teacher, and headed directly for the cafeteria on the top floor, where they could discuss their views on Miss Davenport without the fear of her hearing them, all of which were far from pleasant. But unfortunately for Bruno, who'd had to stay behind, he was still deep in her clutches. He tried to explain that he almost always was prompt in handing assignments in, and that so far he'd been receiving excellent grades, and how he was much liked by Shorofsky, but he might as well have been talking to a brick wall. Miss Davenport didn't seem to show an inkling of understanding. In fact, it seemed obvious to Bruno that she didn't care a damn what he said. Finally, she set him an extra assignment, claiming it was to be finished by the next day. Miss Davenport, today's Wednesday, and on that day I usually get tons of homework. So, she challenged, so I don't think it's fair of you to give me this extra piece of work, and also to require it completed by tomorrow, Bruno replied, feeling terribly nervous, if not frightened by a reaction to his problems. Oh, you don't think it's fair, Martelli? She replied, a chilling edge to her voice. No, I don't, he lamented feebly. Well, maybe if you'd handed your work in on time, she glared at him, those piercing green eyes melting what little confidence he had left. But still Bruno managed to stand his ground, at least for a few moments. Look, Mr. Shorofsky wouldn't react like this. He'd help me. But obviously he wasn't going to receive any assistance whatsoever from this temporary tutor. Good day, Martelli. That meant, I've finished with your excuses, Martelli. Now get out. It was hopeless to continue a conversation, so he left, shrouded in a cloud of dejection, with a touch of anger mixed in. When he ever felt depressed in any shape or form, Bruno usually went to seek out his confidante, Doris Schwartz. He found her in the cafeteria playing with a strawberry mousse that looked unfit for human consumption, but then so did most of the food served in the school's canteen. With her on the same table was the rest of the gang in the form of Leroy, Danny and Coco. Bruno didn't feel much like eating after his conflict with Madame Dragonbreath, but he managed a ham sandwich and a chocolate milk. When he'd finished paying for the items, he went over and joined his friends without saying a word. Moodily he plonked himself down next to Doris and began to unwrap the cellophane from around his sandwich. Well, hello, Martelli, and why the long face? Doris asked, noticing her friend's look of anguish. Bruno looked up briefly at her, didn't say anything, then took a bite out of the ham sandwich and munched on it in total disgust, because it tasted more like leather, so he quickly washed it down with the chocolate milk. That was the only decent drink you could find in the School of the Arts' canteen, at least. The silence was brief, and Danny broke it by cracking one of his awful jokes. What's up, Martelli? Is it that time of the month? Bruno felt like throwing the rest of his ham sandwich in Danny's face, but refrained himself from doing so. It was Coco, and only her, who knew why the young musician was feeling low. It's that new replacement teacher, Miss Dogbreath Davenport, isn't it? Coco asked him. Yes, Bruno replied gloomily. What happened? She's given me extra work, which has got to be in by tomorrow without fail. Bruno bit into his sandwich, which seemed to taste worse than ever, and decided that was as much as his stomach was going to allow. Why didn't you do your homework like you were supposed to? Leroy asked him with one of those smirks clearly displayed on his face. Bruno reacted rather strongly, taking Leroy and the others by surprise. Look, I was having difficulty with one of my assignments, okay? Now, usually I'd go to Shorofsky and he'd offer advice and assistance, but... Coco cut him off, realising his problem. But she didn't. Bruno didn't need to give a vocal answer and just nodded. Coco flared up, causing everyone sat at the table to jump. She's just a cow! This caused a timid smile to appear on Bruno's face when he observed that he wasn't alone when it came to disliking Miss Davenport. It quickly faded when he realised he still had the extra work to do. There's no way I can do this bloody work for tomorrow, he moaned. Doris remembered also that it was Wednesday and added, Oh, I just love today. What with a biology essay to do, and then it'll be quickly followed by math, French, geography, and not forgetting Miss Sherwood's lesson, 5th period, Danny added. She's bound to set us a bloody essay to do. And on top of all that, I've got that stinking extra music assignment to do as well, Bruno complained sharply. Just don't do it, Coco offered. Bruno shot her a don't be so stupid look and replied, oh, great, and if I don't do it, she'll come down on me like a ton of bricks and set me even more assignments. Or use the cane, Danny piped up, to which he received a warning glare from Bruno. That's not funny, Danny. His little breath of fresh air, which came in the plumpish and terribly cute form of Doris Schwartz, slipped a comforting arm around his shoulders. Martelli, I can't say for certain because I wasn't there, but it seems to me that this temporary member of staff has got it in for you, love. Oh, she's definitely got it in for me, Bruno retorted, but I can't understand why. It was Leroy who quite unexpectedly gave Bruno a hint of reassurance in his usual streetwise manner, of course. Look, Martelli, if she keeps getting on your case, this temporary teacher will be temporary, period. Catch my drift. Bruno smiled briefly, but it didn't really help matters all that much. Let's hope Shorofsky returns soon, Danny said, also trying to help. Mr. Shorofsky's recovering from a heart attack, so it's going to be a while before he's back here teaching, Doris replied. She knew the truthful statement had made Bruno feel worse, so quickly added, but Martelli, if you ever need a friend, I'm here. Her arm was still around his shoulders, so he raised one hand and held Doris's in his, whereupon she lay her head on his shoulder. Thanks, Doris, he muttered softly. Coco corrected the Jewish maiden slightly. We're all here for you, Martelli, but it looks like you'll be putting up with Madame Dogbreath for at least a week. A full solid week with Miss Davenport driving him insane wasn't Bruno's idea of a healthy life at all. Maybe it'd just be a week, though, or what if it was longer? At least he was going to have his friends beside him during this torturous week. They'd hopefully prevent him from ending up in an asylum. Bruno felt a little at ease as the kids continued to explain that they'd give him all the support they could, and Doris rewarded him with a loving kiss on the cheek, which radiated a pleasant warm feeling over his entire body. There was always something special about Doris, who managed to make him feel more relaxed than any other kid he knew. Maybe it was due to them being slightly more than just good friends. Whatever it was, Bruno appreciated it and gladly accepted her attention, which she bestowed upon him, especially when he was in the heat of depression. The week that followed was just as Bruno had predicted. Absolute hell. Whenever she got the chance, Miss Dogbreath Davenport blamed everything on poor Martelli. Now, sometimes the reasons for picking on him were due to him talking in class. That wasn't really something to falter with, since Shorofsky had also got at Bruno for that, but on very rare occasions. Only it seemed that she would tick him off more than once, even on days when it wasn't even his fault. It was on the Monday of the second week when she'd first displayed her adoring admiration for him. Doris had joined the lesson as it was vocal coaching, and that was part of her studies. They were rehearsing a song and practising choral singing, which usually involved Bruno accompanying them on the piano. But Miss Darling Davenport, as Doris loved to call her behind her back, had insisted that he should join in with the singing instead. This caused several sniggers to erupt around the room, since everyone knew Martelli couldn't sing to save his life. Anyway, Bruno was a composer, and throughout his days at performing arts, that's what he'd mastered in. However, Miss Davenport wasn't going to let up on him and demanded him to join in. But Bruno wasn't going to be humiliated, so promptly refused to obey her orders. She then gave him a lecture on how disobedient he was, and just as she was about to shower more contempt on the young musician's head, the bell went for the end of the period. So that lesson had been a complete waste of time, as nothing had got accomplished due to her yelling at Bruno. By Thursday, Bruno was beginning to feel extremely tired, annoyed and completely fed up with her accusations and comments. So it was during lunch, which the group decided to spend in the wardrobe room due to it being too unhealthy for any walk of life to survive in the School of the Arts' canteen, when Bruno let all his feelings pour out in front of Doris, Coco, Leroy and Danny. I can't stand that woman any more, he began, of course referring to Dogbreath Davenport, as Coco loved to call her. She's driving me insane. She's the most uncaring, unfeeling, inhuman being I've ever come across. I can't abide her. I hate her. She's just a bloody cow. The kids were a little shocked by Bruno's sudden outburst, especially when he used the word cow. It was very rare to hear Mr. Martelli swear, but in this case he had every right to. Doris went over and cradled him in her arms like he was a little puppy dog needing care and attention. Then she decided something was going to have to be done about this temporary teacher. She didn't feel temporary at all. In fact, she seemed an extremely unpleasant part of the kids' lives, which was going to remain a permanent fixture till they all graduated. "I don't know about you lot," Doris exclaimed, "but I for one am getting sick of the way that woman is treating our composer." "Hear, hear," Leroy cheered very loudly. "So what's to be done?" Doris asked, continuing what she'd been planning to say. "I know," Coco piped up, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. "We're going to have to discuss this with some other teacher." "Miss Grant," Leroy put in. "She'd help, I know she would." "Want to give it a try, Martelli?" Danny asked, deciding to add to the conversation. Bruno looked up from Doris's warm and comforting embrace. "Might as well," he replied, knowing he had nothing whatsoever to lose by it. But first he was going to have to face the final period of music study, because unfortunately Miss Grant wasn't in the school that day, due to regular visits to the dentist. And what was more upsetting was that in this period Doris wasn't with him to offer him protection. Coco was by his side, though, and also very angry with Miss Davenport for continually pouncing on Bruno Martelli at any giveable opportunity. It was during this lesson that she found something else to blame him for. "Martelli, your work has been getting very slack lately," she began in her usual shrill-pitched manner. Bruno couldn't believe what he was hearing. Slack! How dare she accuse him of such a thing? Bruno knew for a fact that his musical knowledge, even the classical garbage, was greatly improving. Coco also couldn't believe her own ears and turned to face her friend, who had a complete look of bewilderment displayed on his face. "Martelli, just ignore the stupid cow," she whispered, so that Miss Davenport couldn't hear. Bruno let out a heavy sigh, but decided that he wasn't just going to sit back and let her throw this accusation at him. No way. "Miss Davenport, I know that my work is improving." "Oh, you do, Mr. Martelli," she replied coldly. "Yes," he went on, knowing it was probably going to land him in even deeper trouble, but he felt it had to be said. "And if you don't approve of it, then I'd like it to be marked by another music teacher." Oh God, Coco thought. She knew Bruno's statement should be carried out to the full, but at the same time she understood from the angry look on Miss Davenport's face, Bruno was in deeper peril. The teacher continued to glare at her pupil, making Bruno terribly nervous. "Mr. Martelli," she uttered in a stern voice, "I mark all the papers. No one else touches them. Understand?" Bruno didn't make a reply. Deep down he wanted to yell at her, scream at her, maybe deliver a kick up her. He refrained from himself from thinking along those lines. Miss Davenport went on. "I'm the teacher and you're the pupil, Martelli, which means you do not tell me what to do. Have you got that inside your head now? Good." Coco and half the class were feeling extremely embarrassed for Bruno by now. She glanced at him, hoping he wouldn't react. But Bruno had had it up to here with this so-called music teacher, and it was getting to the crucial point where he was going to explode into a fit of rage, which wasn't usually Bruno's nature at all. But this Miss Davenport had pushed him over his limits. "Now, as I was saying, your work is getting shabby, and you're just going to have to do something about that now, aren't you, Mr. Martelli?" She was treating him like a child, as if he didn't know how to handle anything, and she was telling him off for being bad. That was the final straw. Something inside Bruno's mind snapped. "Look," he began, half yelling out the word. "I'm tired of being treated like this," he went on. "Dear God, Bruno, what are you doing?" Coco asked herself. She then became extremely concerned for him. "Mr. Martelli," Miss Davenport warned harshly, but Bruno couldn't stop once he'd started. "I'm just sick and tired of you getting at me," he yelled, to the absolute surprise of the class. "I'd like to know the real reason why you're doing this," Bruno went on, lowering his voice a little. "Is it because I'm Italian, a pianist? What?" he asked plaintively, then added, "I know it's not because I'm no good at the work I do. No, that's not the reason." He looked at her and her face seemed incapable of showing any feeling for him whatsoever. "What the hell is the reason?" Bruno finished with. Again Coco looked across at him, and this time she saw a thin film of tears in his eyes, so reached over and gently patted his hand affectionately. Miss Davenport was far from showing any affection. "Martelli, I want to see you at the end of this lesson." "Oh, not bloody again," he whispered under his breath, to which Coco heard him, and still holding his hand, gave it a small squeeze. "That way we can sort out this outburst in a decent manner without yelling in the classroom," she went on. The young musician was just about to reply when Coco squeezed his hand as a warning. Martelli, no. He decided that maybe Coco was right, so didn't say anything. Naturally, his confrontation after the lesson with the wonderful Miss Davenport left Bruno still with unanswered questions to why she had this obvious fascination of picking on him in anything he did. It was during this conversation that she in fact made it quite clear that she could jeopardise his career and have him thrown out the School of the Arts. After that, she'd excused him and left so he could contemplate over the situation. It was nearing the end of another wretched school day for Bruno, and dejectedly he made his way to his locker to take out his coat and items he'd need for study at home. By now he was feeling terribly uncomfortable and upset and just wanted to get home as fast as he could. He was just closing his locker door when Doris ran up to him, a look of total concern on her face. "Coco's told me about your outburst in Miss Stinkerbreath Davenport's lesson," she said, trying to add at least a hint of amusement to her sentence. Bruno looked up rather dismally and replied, "Really, how interesting." Now, Miss Doris Renee Schwartz had one certain role in the School of the Arts which no other kid could perform so well as she could. That was to be a confidant, someone who understood people's feelings, a person who always was chosen when it came to cheering people up, and she was a very strong shoulder to cry on. Doris also had something secret that she so far hadn't let on to anyone, and that was her feelings for Bruno. Even he wasn't aware of them, but when he ever felt downcast, she was always there for him, by his side, giving him her undivided attention. Gently she put a hand on his shoulder and without a word led him into the wardrobe room, which thankfully was unoccupied. There she sat him down on the prop couch near the wall and seated herself next to him. It was then she spoke, showing a genuine affection for him. "Bruno, I know this is going to sound a bit silly, but try not to let that teacher hurt you like this." Bruno listened while staring at the wall opposite him, then buried his face in his hands, but he didn't break down and cry. Doris pulled him towards her and rocked him softly. "Oh, Martelli, please don't act like this," she whispered in his ear. Slowly he raised his head to look up at her, and she saw moisture glistening in his eyes. "Doris, I just can't stand it any more," he whimpered. "She now claims she can throw me out the school." "What?" Doris reacted with a start. "Bruno, she cannot throw you out, and even if she attempts to do so, we'll all stand up for you, all of us," she tried to reassure him as best she could. Looking directly into those haunting blue-green eyes of his, she noticed a single tear begin to fall, so with one of her hands she immediately wiped it away, then drew him back into a close embrace. Bruno reacted not so unexpectedly and put his arms around her gently. It dawned on Doris that something special between the two of them was beginning to form. She felt it, and she knew Bruno could feel it too by the way he'd responded to her touch. Automatically they both raised their heads, and by now Doris could see that Bruno was crying. Without any moment of hesitation she let her lips brush against his. This caused a wave of warmth to flow through Bruno's body, and he knew he didn't want the moment to end just yet. So he responded to her kiss and drew her closer, stroking the back of her neck very tenderly. Now it was obvious to anyone that Bruno, the shy musician, and Doris, the round, soft-edged Jewish girl, were far more involved with each other than they'd ever been before. Luckily, though, there was no one to witness them share each other's love for the first time with a gentle kiss. Until who should come waltzing in but Miss Davenport. The door opened, causing both Doris and Bruno to leap out of their skins, which immediately refrained them from sharing their tender kissing. What was more shattering was the fact that the teacher, who absolutely hated Bruno for reasons he just didn't know about, had caught them red-handed in the wardrobe room. The beautiful atmosphere was completely broken when they realised who had startled them. "I hear making out in the wardrobe room is an offence," she exclaimed harshly. The fact that Bruno and Doris had had no intentions of making love to one another went unheeded. Bruno, who already intensely disliked her, replied angrily, "We weren't making out." "Of course not, Martelli," she replied, disbelieving everything he said. So Doris also decided to add her contributions. "Actually, Miss Davenport," she stated firmly, "Bruno was, or has been, in tears thanks to you, and I was comforting him." It was obvious to anyone that Bruno had indeed been crying, but Miss Davenport didn't give a damn. "I'll have to report you," she told the two kids while staring directly at Bruno. Report us then. Do what you bloody want, Bruno replied, the tears beginning to show again. Without another word he pushed past Miss Davenport and left the room. Doris leapt up, intending to go after him, but first she had something to say to this temporary teacher. "You're killing Bruno! You're ripping him apart!" she yelled. "Can't you just leave him the hell alone?" With that she left a startled Miss Davenport alone in the room to consider what Doris had said. Doris found Bruno in the lobby, propping up one of the walls, eyes closed tight shut. Everyone had left the school by now, and someone had switched off the lights, causing a gloomy grey shadow to fall over the hushed lobby. Slowly she approached him. He turned and was just about to allow her to hold him in her arms when he remembered her. "I can't, Doris. Miss Davenport's probably watching us from the shadows like a bloody hawk." His voice sounded choked and frail. Jesus, what was this woman doing to him? Doris, who didn't feel in the least bit confident, ignored his words and gathered him up in a large bear hug, whilst replying, "Stuff, Miss Dogbreath Davenport," and didn't really care if the woman could hear her. "Why did Shorofsky suffer a heart attack?" Bruno asked sadly. "What did he do to be rewarded with such a punishment?" Bruno wanted his old teacher to return. Correction, Bruno was praying he'd come back. Doris too wanted Mr. Shorofsky to once more be head of his music department. That way all the crap about Bruno being useless in the eyes of Miss Davenport, God how she loathed that name, could be sorted out. But for now they had to fend for themselves as best they could. And Doris was going to have to be Bruno's guardian angel. "Martelli, we'd better go before Miss Stinkerbreath comes this way," she whispered softly. Too late. Miss Davenport was just making her way towards them as she spoke. They heard her increasing footsteps. "Oh, shit," Bruno breathed, summing up his dejected feelings in those two words. Doris immediately stopped hugging him, frightened in case the stupid woman would turn on them again and accuse them of making out in the lobby next. "Good night," was all she called in that well-known chilly tone of voice. "Good bloody riddance," Doris said, and returned to hugging Bruno. "Martelli, will see how Shorofsky is and go visit him in hospital. Maybe you can explain the awful way you've been treated to him. He'll definitely understand and probably kick Davenport out of this school on her ass." At last she got Bruno to smile, and even if it was only a faint glimmer of one, it was at least something. "Come on, Martelli, I'll treat you to a slap-up Italian candlelit meal with chocolate shakes," she announced brightly, leading him down the steps and out of the school. Bruno looked at the sign which read School of the Arts in large stone letters. "I used to love this place," he said solemnly. "And you will again, just as soon as we get—" Before Doris could say it, Bruno cut in with, "As soon as we get old Stinkerbreath out of the place," he said, a grin beginning to appear on his face. "Out on her big fat ass," Doris added, to which she burst out laughing. Doris Schwartz had a chuckle which reminded Bruno of Woody Woodpecker on the tube. It was a laugh which was always contagious and grabbed anyone who heard it. He sniggered a little. Then Doris looked directly at him and laughed again. That did it, and finally Bruno allowed himself to end up in uncontrollable fits of giggles as Doris tightened her arm around his shoulder, also killing herself laughing. They didn't care a damn who heard them and continued cracking up all the way up the street till they reached the taxi stand. When a taxi arrived to take them into Chinatown, Bruno, through bursts of giggles, told the driver their destination. Whereupon the taxi driver looked strangely at them in his mirror, obviously thinking they were high on dope or some such thing. That caused Doris to present her Woody Woodpecker laugh to the startled driver, who totally ignored the two kids all the way to Chinatown.